There we go. Pick back up with where we left off on Tuesday. Just before we get into Charles Russell, are there any questions over the course outline? Anything we talked about on Tuesday? Anything that we went over up until this point? Content-wise or per semester? Not so much now? Everyone's still going to make straight A's? Coolio. Alright, so we started chapter 18 on Tuesday. And we talked about this utopian, iconic impression people had about life in the West, right? You're back sitting in the East, you're living in the East, in this mundane, hard, poverty-ridden existence, and you keep hearing these stories, and you have this avenue of belief about life in the West. How great it is, how exciting it is, and the adventure it is, and the opportunities, and all this, these great elements that if you go west, you're going to find, and it's how your life is going to be. And as we're fixing to see, that is not the case. But again, it is believed. So, someone tell me, what all the things we talked about on Tuesday, what were some of the notions that were fueling this iconic interpretation of life in the West? Dime novels were a huge one. Very good. These exciting, adventure-filled stories about life in the West that were fictional. What else?
Was there like all the letters they sent home saying how great it was?
Letters from loved ones. Absolutely. Another good one.
Buffalo Bills TV show.
Wild West Show. Buffalo Bills Wild West Show. Very good. What else could possibly fuel the interpretation? Art. There you go. Books. Mark Twain, first ever Western author, right? Songs, plays. So all these things rolled together. I mean, they're all painting the same impression. They're all sending the same message. So if you have all these different avenues, these different areas, just repeating the same thing, why don't you believe it's true, right? And, I mean, art is a big one. We talked about Frederick Remington last week. It's this first week. It's the same week. Just kidding. We talked about it on Tuesday. Pretty interesting story to his life, right? Lived only until about 48 years old, didn't really take care of himself too well, but still created 3,000 paintings, 25 bronze sculptures, one of the greatest Western artists of all time. But, interestingly enough, the other greatest Western artist of all time lived in the same time frame, late 1800s. They did not work together. They did not really coincide together. In fact, for a long time, Russell will be in Canada, while Remington is in the United States. But the artwork they produce mirrors each other. I mean, if you go to a museum and you see a Frederick Remington Charles Russell Museum, if you don't know who's who, you can't tell who's who. They're that good, they're that beautiful, they're that symbolic. But very different stories, very different paths to their life. Russell lives a little bit longer than Remington does, lives about 62. Doesn't create as much, by the way. He only leaves behind about 2,000 paintings, which I say only. Remington lived behind 3,000. He only. I think I've made one in my lifetime, so I have no room to talk. But 2,000 paintings, a few sculptures, but it's because he didn't spend as much time as an artist in his life. Remington is the soldier artist, was the artist for the United States Army. Russell is the cowboy artist. His majority of his life will be spent as a cowboy. I feel like that's really bright on the screen. I'm going to turn more this way. There we go. So long story short, now the beginnings of their life are pretty dang similar. They both hate school. Absolutely hate school. Not for them. Russell as well as, is sketching and, pictures in his notebook instead of, taking notes in class, etc., making little figurines out of clay and recess instead of playing and socializing with the other children. Hits about 16 years old and decides, you know what? Enough's enough. He's had enough school. He's got all the education he needs. He's done. He too drops out of school. He too, ironically enough, ends up in Montana on a sheep farm, just like Remington did. However, unlike Remington, he said, yeah, it's kind of cold here in the winters. This is too physically taxing every day. This is not for me. Russell loves it. He has found his niche. He has found his place in this world. He is meant to be a cowboy. And he gets work on a sheep farm, the OH ranch up in Montana. It starts one off. It starts as a cowboy, starts as an employee, but spends years on this ranch. He climbs the ranks and becomes the ranch foreman, the top dog on the ranch. And it's one of those things where, especially back in this day, I don't know if anybody's been to Montana in the winters. It's like 75 and breezy and sunny, right? Yeah, no. It's cold. It's below freezing temperatures. It's flipping freezing cold, right? Nobody wants to be there. So the owners of the ranches, long story short, come winter, and the owners who could afford it would usually go east, go wait out, live out the winter somewhere way more cushy, and then just leave the ranch foreman in charge of, taking care of the ranch and the cattle. Not cattle, actually, the sheep. Cattle are up in the north at this point. We get the point. And then letters would be exchanged. Even though the owner's not physically there all winter long, he's corresponding with his ranch foreman. Sending letters, asking of the condition of the cattle, how things are faring, checking in, etc., etc. And normally, if you receive a letter, the primary response is to write a letter back, right? Which normally happens, except for this one specific time frame. It was a hard winter. The ranch foreman, wrote a letter to Russell, asking about how the cattle were faring, the conditions of the ranch, how things were going. And instead of sending a letter back, because again, Russell's first love is art, painting, sketching, drawing, etc., etc. He sketches this picture. His first ever technical piece of artwork is called "Waiting on a Chinook," and it portrays everything he would have said in words. Everything is quite clear in his picture. He sends his picture back, and it's so good. When the ranch owner gets this picture, he was like, "Damn, look what my cowboy can do, right?" And he sends it to the local newspapers and magazines, kind of, boasting. He's like, "Look at this. This is so good." And the magazines publish it, newspapers publish it, kind of like Remington in a sense. People start, see this picture and they go, "Oh my God, this guy is an artist." And kind of like Remington, people start showing, they figure out where he is. They start showing up and they start asking him to work, right? Trying to hire him for artwork, trying to convince him to, sketch for them, draw for them, paint for them, become an artist. But he doesn't want to. He loves this life. He loves being a cowboy, and he's getting all this pressure to leave, all this, these people wanting him to do what he doesn't want to do. And finally, with all this pressure on him constantly, he's like, I've had enough. This is getting irritating. I don't want to do this anymore. In 1888, to get away from the pressure, believe it or not, of being an artist, which, by the way, it's okay to not want to be one. He loves his life. He knows what he wants. That is so just fine, right? But to get away from all this pressure and these expectations and these people coming after him, he's not only going to quit his job on the ranch, he's just going to leave the United States, right? Now, Montana's on the border. It's not like he traveled across the country to get away. But he's going to leave and he's going to cross the border into Canada and live several years of his life, about 3 years of his life up in Canada as a cowboy, as a frontier cowboy, finding work where he could. But he also befriended an Indian tribe called the Blood Indians, who he actually spent a lot of time living amongst. There were several, almost a year he lived with the Blood Indians up in Canada. And a lot of his artwork actually is of the Blood Indians. But he's about 1892 or so, and his health, it's, again, 1890s, y'all. It's not, he's been a cowboy for decades. It's not the easiest lifestyle. His health starts to deteriorate, he starts to have some issues. And due to his own health, he's forced to move into the city, right? He just can't, his body can't handle being, this rugged outdoor cowboy lifestyle anymore. If he's, for his own sake, he's got to go to the city and get a more cushy job, right? So it's only kind of because he had to. He'll go to Great Falls, right? Great Falls, Canada, and will finally give in to the want of him being an artist. And that's so he will dedicate the rest of his life to art. And again, go on to create 2,000 paintings in that time frame. Worked his little butt off, right? Created several bronze sculptures. And he will just remain an artist and create these phenomenal pieces of work until he passes away at 62 years old. Now, between things like Buffalo Bill's Wild Show, Remington, Mark Twain, the first ever Western literature author, right? Russell, letters, dime novels, all of these things, it's pretty understandable why people had this interpretation about life in the West that they did. As we're fixing to find out, though, as when they go west, and this is what they're expecting their life to be and what they're going to find, it's just a little different. Just a hair. Maybe, possibly. And by the way, exactly. But what about some of Russell's work? His very first ever, what kind of people went, damn. And the ranch foreman went, look what my cowboy can do. This is waiting on a Chinook. It may not blow your socks off. It's not meant to blow your socks off. He wasn't trying to blow your socks off. He was just trying to paint an impression for his boss of how things in the ranch were going that winter. It's still a pretty damn good, though, in terms of expression, right? I mean, you can tell everything that he was going to say in words is pretty clear in this picture, right? Does that look warm? It just looks cold, right? Obviously, it's a harsh winter. It's dark. You just chills your bones looking at it. Obviously, wolves are a problem. Well, the livestock are suffering. It's not a lot of vegetation. Cavalry or livestock are ribbing. And this is, so people were like, damn, if he can do this, what can he do if he tries? Finally gives in. If this doesn't blow your socks off, he went on to create 2,000 paintings that looks like that. Those are edits of the Blood Indians, by the way. Pretty similar to what the type of thing Remington did. And again, it's so pretty. This one's in the Amon Carter too. And like every stroke, tan, brown, white. There's some greens in here. There's some like olive colors. There's some olive whites. There's some beiges. Every stroke is a different color. And these all blend together in the stroke. It's just beautiful. They're stunning in real life. But all of these things make people go west, right? And a lot of people will go west and buy land, right? Land is cheap in this day and age. So, hundreds of thousands of people will go west, and if they can afford to buy their own land, they do. And would you believe when there's all this money coming in from the sale of Western land, the government might just throw their little sticky fingers in there and take advantage of it? Shocking, right? However, technically, on the flip side, in this day and age, when the government is going to take advantage of, all these Western land sales, they actually put it right back into the good for these people. Per se, there is I'm going to skip it on my next slide, it's not really critically important, but the government will spend the money from these Western land sales into investing in the railroad and making sure that the railroad is built and the railroad, comes across all these new areas and towns. The people who are living in these areas, these farmers and these ranchers, have access to the railroad if need be. It's called the Pacific Railway Act. Making sure they're taken care of that way. More popular is the government takes money from the sale of this land and builds colleges and universities in the area through the Morrill Land Grant College Acts, which we build colleges, which I'm sure probably taught English and reading for those who weren't great at it in this day and age. Immigrants, African Americans may not know how to read, so it taught the basics, but then it also had a lot of specific, specialized classes that taught you how to survive, how to actually succeed in the West, right? If you've been living in Chicago, you have this dream of owning your land to be a farmer or rancher, but you don't have the first idea what it's really going to take to succeed. They have ranching classes, they have farming classes, they have irrigation classes, they have soil classes, they have fertilization classes, technological education. So building colleges will teach you how to actually make it, how to survive if at all possible, which is a good thing, right? So they make sure the railroad comes through, the Pacific Railway Act. They're building colleges that teach you how to live off the land and succeed, again, if at all possible. But this one was the most popular, the Homestead Act. Because what if you could not afford to buy your own land? If you're making poverty level, you're not even making poverty level, right? You're making $400 to $500 a year when the cost of living is $600 to $800 a year. You can't afford to buy land. That's okay. There are avenues for you. Now, let me emphasize, you have to be white and you have to be male to take advantage of this. But if you're white and male, an American, we throw that in there, this is an option for you. You can be selected to be a recipient of the Homestead Act, in which the government would give you 160 acres of land for free for 5 years. So they would give you 160 acres of land for free. You had 5 years to make a go of it, to try to make it profitable, make it successful. If you're going to be a rancher, get it going. And after 5 years, as long as you have succeeded, you've got a working ranch, and obviously you have a successful farm. What you're producing goes back to the country. Obviously, you're putting back to the country that gave you with your agriculture or your livestock. Well, then after that 5 year span, the land is signed over to you and it's legally yours. But after 5 years, you have not been able to make a go of it. You're struggling. You're still bankrupt. Well, guess what? They're going to take it from you, and they're going to give it to someone else to see if they might have a better shot than you did, if they can figure it out, right? Because they don't want this land just going to waste. So this was an avenue and an option for a lot of people, a lot of people. But you had to be white, you had to be male, you had to be American. And of course, the only people going west were white, male, and American, right? I mean, who else would want to go west in this day and age? Surely not immigrants who are facing discrimination and poverty in where they live. No, why would they want to go west for all this grandiose opportunity? African Americans, the Civil War is over. Why would they want to leave where they were? They've been enslaved, technically, still facing racism and segregation and persecution. They don't want to go west, do they? No, of course they do. Of course they do. But of course, these won't technically be options for them. So most immigrants and most African Americans will find themselves employed either as a cowboy, if they can get hired on, or in other industries. Because there are 2 other industries. Do I want to hit that one? No, I'll just say Mary knows. There are 2 other industries that are flourishing out west, and most African Americans and immigrants will find themselves employed in one of the 2 avenues. What could be an industry with the goal, its goal has always been to go from the Atlantic to the Pacific, being built everywhere, accessible to everyone. We've already mentioned it several times. What could be a big industry that is going to be flourishing out west?
Railroad.
The railroad, there you go. So a lot of African Americans, a lot of immigrants find themselves employed by the railroad, which, if you know anything about the industry, is not rainbows and daisies and fun and adventure and excitement. It's still hell on earth. Not what they're going to expect, but it's their only opportunity. And there will be a primary immigrant group, one immigrant group that find that the numbers from this area will rise above the rest. What immigrant group will primarily be found working in the railroad industry? Do we know?
Chinese.
Over Asia, the Chinese. Very good. There's another big industry that will flourish in the West with all of this land there to explore and dig under and find natural resources such as coal, the mining industry. And a lot of African Americans and a lot of immigrants find themselves working in the mining industry for the same pay and the same conditions, just a different industry that they found back east. Dangerous, very unsafe, pennies on the dollar, horrible working conditions, not what they expected, not what they were expecting at all as they're watching Buffalo Bills Wild Show, or Buffalo Bills Wild West Show. They're like, this isn't what we thought it would be. But you also have a primary immigrant group that will end up working there as well. I'm going to skip a lot of space of time because it's in your book. I'd rather go to here. So anyway, so the Irish, by the way, the Irish will be your primary immigrant group. As we're going to see, we'll talk about the most famous Irish labor union in all of history, chapter 19, the Mullaght Magwires. There was even a movie that came out about them with Sean Connery playing the keynote actor, and he was like in his 20s. I didn't even know Sean Connery was ever in his 20s. It's a little freaky. I'm like, who are you? But they will be the most famous Irish group in all of history. You have the Chinese primarily working for the railroad. But again, families, most whites will be your farmers and your ranchers. So those are your big 4 industries out west. Farming, ranching, mining, railroad. But, so African Americans and immigrants go west and find that life is not at all what they expected it to be. So do white Americans. So you go west, you take advantage of the Homestead Act, right? You've got to start with a thought process of, what if you're late to the game? What if, you decide you're going to go west about 10 years after hundreds of thousands of others already have? There's only so much land there for the taking, right? So what if, the only land less left to give you. You sign up, you say, I want to be a ranch, I want to be a farmer. All right, well, we got 160 acres of land in this area known as New Mexico. Go give it a whirl. How many farms are out there? Successful farm, big farms do you see in New Mexico in the 1800s? Like 30,000, right? None, right? You don't farm in most areas of New Mexico, especially in the days before irrigation. Or, we have 160 acres for you to be a rancher, go be a cattle rancher out in the deserts of Arizona. You're already set up to fail, right? It's just not going to work. So some people are just set up to fail unknowingly to them from the get-go. But let's say you were given 160 acres of land, in the plush areas, the plain, in somewhere like Kansas, where you could make a go of it, where it was possible to succeed. But there's still a lot of things when you're pushing a button, pulling a lever back east, looking at this art, reading these novels and things of nature that don't even occur to you are going to be issues to expect. For say weather patterns. What if you put your entire life savings, every penny you brought with you, into your setting up your farm, your first set of crops? And you're in the middle of Kansas, and there's a creek, and there is water sources, but let's just say that there's a drought. It's this time of year of Kansas, and there's no rainfall for a month or two. Your suck ponds, your creeks dry up. There is no water for 1,500 miles. Spoiler alert, crops need water to survive and grow. All your crops shrivel up and die, and you lose all your money, and you're sunk. You didn't even think about that being a possibility back in that day and age, right? I mean, that's not even a thought in your head to expect. Or insects. You have grasshoppers, you have beetles, you have all sorts of insects. What if they come along and they destroy your first crop? You can't sell your products. You can't sell your food. And all of a sudden, every penny that you spent, setting up the Sea Life, it's gone. Oh, bad. Oh, well, too bad, so sad. Supply and demand. If you're the only farmer in the area and you go to the farmer's market, you can sell your crops for whatever price you want to put on them, right? The less they are, the better the price. I'm going to sell my carrots for 50 cents a carrot. No one's going to complain because they're the only carrots that are there for sale. 2 years later, you go to the farmer's market and there's 200 carrots already there for sale. You can only sell your carrots for 5 cents a carrot. Still cost you the same amount to make them, but now it's costing you more to grow them. That you're making a profit. You don't think about stuff like that. Not to mention it's lonely. You might be the only person in your area for 500 miles. And of course there are no bars. You have a horse, but there are no bars. Meaning, you want to talk about how all of us, I'm sure myself included, went crazy when all this isolation and this corona stuff first hit. And we were all quarantined, and we weren't supposed to go anywhere. People were going nuts, stuck at home. I'm sure we all went out at some, we all gave in and went out at some point, right? However, what if there was nowhere to go? Which means if you come with your wife and your kids, you know what, you better really, surely, if you're married, you love your husband, or you love your wife, right? Hence, you got married. But on the flip side, you also really, really better like them. For those of us who are in long-term relationships, that could be completely, totally different things, right? Because guess what? That might be the only face you see day in and day out for a year at a time. Oh my God, right? Depression is a huge factor. Loneliness is a huge factor. It's really freaking hard to make a go of it. And these are things you don't think about when you're, all you're absorbing are all these, sources telling you how great life in the West is, right? Ranchers are in the same boat. Droughts. What if the creeks and the rivers dry up and there's nothing for water for your cattle, your horses, your sheep to drink? You don't think about that. Indians. Guess what? That 160 acres of land that was either given to you or the land that you bought was someone else's first. Since 1607, this has always been someone else's land first, right? And since as time has gone on, the Indians have just gotten more and more understanding about us taking their land, right? Like, okay, I know it's going to happen. Yeah, you can go ahead and have it. No problem. No. They're still going to be salty. They're still going to be bitter over the freaking situation. So let's just say they're going to retaliate for you taking what was their home. So you spend your entire life savings on your first herd of cattle, herd of sheep, herd of goats, whatever it is. You wake up one morning, they're all gone. Indians came in the middle of the night, stole all your livestock. Retaliation. Was there insurance back in the 1800s on stuff like that? No. Sucks to be you. It is what it is. You don't think about that, do you? Supply and demand, also obviously a problem. But, originally, if you're in the South, Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Kansas, the cattle markets, you might be able to sell your cattle for 40 or 50 bucks a head. Especially in the areas like Texas, where it's going to grow exponentially, and you're going to have 300, livestock, or maybe 1,000 head of cattle at the livestock sale. They only bring $4 a head, supply and demand. But this is, when it comes to supply and demand, this is where ranchers have a whole huge big opportunity that farmers do not. If they're bringing $4 a head in Texas, well, guess what? If you go to the northernmost market for the cattle industry, by the way, which was Kansas, they're still bringing $40, $50 a head up there, regardless of how many cattle are for sale. Why? Because there are no cattle ranches above Kansas. Your livestock you find up north are goats and sheep and pigs. There is no cattle up north. It's a southern agricultural market. What does that mean? People up until this point, battery's dying. Up until the late 1800s, people in New York have never had a steak. They have, people in Maine don't know what a hamburger is. People in Wyoming, they're like, what's a filet mignon? They've never had beef because it's not a northern market. So Kansas is the northernmost market, but all the northern states who are discovering the cattle industry will send buyers to Kansas to buy cattle. So you're selling to every single, from Kansas, you're selling to every single northern state. But in the South, you're selling to to people where the cattle industry is everywhere. Makes sense? So guess what? If our cattle are bringing $4 a head in Texas, but they're bringing $65 in Kansas, surely there's a way to get your cattle up there, right? Surely there's a way to make that money. That leads to a whole new industry that took off for about 20 years. I mean, if we're going to drive our cattle to Kansas, what industry could that be?
With the cattle.
The cattle drive, right? I tried to make that easy. The cattle drive. That screen is really wide. That's okay. No, I'm going to skip that one. I'm over here. So, that is why the concept in the industry of the cattle drive is born. And then again, for about 20 years, this is a very profitable and saving grace for the cattle industry down south. But your cattle drive would occur, and it would only occur once a year. In the spring, after roundup, again, your cattle are, your younger cattle you sell, year, 2 years old, in their prime. You would bring them in from the pastures, from their herds, come early spring, and then the cattle drive will commence. Because the cattle drive, let's just say, would end up taking 3 to 4 months. At least 3 months. A perfect trip would be 25 days. In 20 years, how many trips do you think went perfectly?
None.
All of them, right? None. So, about 3 months on average was what it would take. So, once a year in the spring. But, guys, this is also, a lot of people will forget about this. This is why Fort Worth, the start of Fort Worth was founded. Because what is the most historic location in Fort Worth? The stockyards, right? The stockyards were holding centers. The stockyards are where the cattle drive initiated. It's where it was oriented. People from Louisiana, southern Louisiana, southern New Mexico, southern Oklahoma, from all over Texas, where the cattle industry was located, would bring, their cattle to Fort Worth, Texas, to the stockyards. And it was only from the stockyards the cattle would be driven up to Kansas. So now the stockyards, they're historic, they're a big tourist trap. I love the stockyards. They're a nightly party scene, etc., etc. But it's still why 2 or 3 times a day, they still drive the longhorn cattle through the seats of the stockyards, commemorating why its purpose and why it was even there in the first place. It was there for a big, profitable venture. But it was holding yards, and again, so people for weeks would bring their cattle to the stockyards, and it would be held until the day of the cattle drive would begin. And it would not be unusual for about a group of about 12 cowboys plus a foreman, so about 13 men altogether, to take a group of 2,000 to 3,000 cattle at a time on the cattle drive. I mean, we raise cotton cattle, which are small, but I'm just saying, if you can imagine 12 people handling a whole herd of 3,000 head of cattle, that is nothing but constant work and stress and pressure, because oh my dear God, right? So, and they would leave in the spring, and again, only once a year, because a perfect trip would take 25 days, less than a month. And 22-ish years, a trip never went perfect. No, so there are some records of them only taking 50 or 60 days, but on average, it was expected that a cattle drive would take about 3 months' time, because there's all these elements that would occur, along the way. Per se, did we know that cattle are terrified of thunder and lightning? And if there are no fenced-in areas to keep your cattle, and it's the middle of the night, and a thunderstorm rolls through, and it's thunder and it's lightning, what are those cattle going to do?
Bring out.
They're going to freaking run, right? They're going to stampede. And if you got, 2,000 head of cattle running for the damn hills in a thunderstorm, you can't round them up to the next day. How long do you think it took to make sure you got as many cattle back together? They're all scattering like freaking ants when you kick over an anthill. It could take days to weeks, right? And what if you have like 6 thunderstorms in that 3-month span? In the spring, it's pretty common, right? Lots of rain in the spring. What if you have lots of, tons and tons of storms, meaning that it's been a very wet spring, but you hit a river that you naturally can cross, get your cattle across, but due to all the rain, it's flooded. It's flooded, it's fast going. What if you have to go 20, 30, 50 miles all the way before you can find a place to get the cattle across, 20, 30, 50 miles back to get on the trail? Well, that takes time. You're constantly dealing throughout the night with wildlife. 3,000 head of cattle, you don't think that's going to perk up the noses and the ears of things like wolves, mountain lions, Indians, right? Staying up all night to try and protect all these cattle from Indian raids coming down to take your cattle, protecting them from animal attack, herd, wolf attack, coyote attack, etc., etc. Does this sound fun? Anybody want to partake in this? It sounds fun in a perfect world until I'm sure a day about 40 and we're like halfway there and they're like, oh my good God, right? No sleep, staying up all night, taking shifts. It's hard work. It's a lot of hard work. It's profitable and it's kind of been romanticized and it's fun for a period of time and then it's just hard. It's just hard. But again, the goal is, you're going to lose cattle along the way. If you leave with 3,000, you're not getting there with 3,000. Which is when ear tagging and branding first came into play. So the trail boss would have all the ranchers who brought their cattle to the stockyards would all come with either that ranch's brand, they will be branded with the brand so they could keep track of whose cattle was who, or an ear tag, with a name or a number, a letter on it, again to keep track of whose cattle was whose. When you get to the market and sell them, you can keep track and keep a hold of the money. Still more profitable, even if you lose, let's say you send up 600 head of cattle, and you lose 50. It still brings a whole lot more money than you would have gotten for that herd in Texas, right? If you're still selling 550 for $60 a head, when they would have brought forward Texas, it's still profitable enough for you to every spring send your cattle on the cattle drive. But the peak of the cattle drive will only last for about 20 years. Because about 1886, there will be an industry, we've already said the name like 5 times, that'll come along, that'll be, again, spreading out to be accessible to everyone, everywhere, that'll slowly put the cattle drive out of business. And what could that possibly be? The railroad, right? The railroad is going to be credited with a whole heck of a lot in this day and age. Railroad comes through these areas where these cattle ranches are located. Well, guess what? It's way cheaper It's way faster, and you can successfully get all your cattle to Kansas without losing any because they're protected on boxcars, right? So not only do you not have to drive your cattle to the stockyards, quicker, cheaper, all your cattle get there in one piece, you get the entire profit you're looking for. It's about 1886 or so, cattle drive starts to wane due to the railroad. By 1888, it's basically shut down. It's null and void. Railroad took it over. But the concept was still born. And I think the cattle drive is one of the longest lasting legacies of the days of the Old West, right? It's one of those romanticized notions that has survived throughout time, per se. One of the lasting legacies of the Old West. But I mean, it's still hard. Still a whole heck of a lot harder than people thought it was going to be. Not to mention, it's a tough, tough life, right? It's a tough life for a cowboy. And I'm going to skip some of these based on time. Don't worry about it. Not tested on it. Not to mention, I'm going to go to something specific. Hang on. Here we go. Not to mention, whether you're a farmer, or you're a rancher, or you're out west, whatever foot of land you're standing on was in fact someone else's first, right? And there will be dozens and dozens, now there will be the last dozens and dozens, but we will see still, people out west dealing with Indian attack, Indian rebellion. Because not only have we taken their homes, but we're trying to force all of them, we're trying to get rid of them. I'd be salty if someone was trying to get rid of me, just saying. Either kill you off, expect you to convert and completely assimilate to American way of life, and or if you want to remain true to your culture, your traditions, your heritage, you're expected and forced to live on an Indian reservation, right? This tiny little piece of land, while we take what's been your home all these years. Salty, bitter, does not go over well, right? I wouldn't expect it to if I was them. So, long story short, we see a lot of farmers and ranchers and people in the West deal with Indian wars, Indian attack, being raped and scalped and killed in their beds. And eventually in the late 1800s, 1870s, 1880s, military will be sent in to deal and rid the country of the rest of this Indian population. And you have two of the greatest massacres. Not only are they two of the last ever in history, as the fight of the Native Americans is sadly and tragically coming to an end, but two of the greatest massacres in all of history. It's horrible, horrible. God, I wish this wasn't so dark. This is not going to work well, but oh well. It's just for the one lecture. I'll figure it out. Anyway, talking to myself. We've all heard, and we talked about it a little bit on Tuesday, but we're going to go over much more in depth the whole concept of Custer's Last Stand. We've all heard of it. We all at least know the name. What about, who has heard the name, the Sand Creek Massacre? One? Really? Wow, nice. Not many people have. And it was just as tragic and awful and gory as it could possibly be. And a complete awful disaster. And it was a lot of years in the making, right? The whole concept of it will come to be before the Civil War even occurs. You want to talk about history repeating itself in different ways, by the way? If you've had 1301, this same type of situation occurred back then, in the days of a president by the name of Andrew Jackson. Now, someone impressed me, and if you don't know, that's okay. I don't expect you to. I just like to make you guess. Does anybody remember, before the days of Andrew Jackson, 1301, anybody remember the United States president who actually worked tooth and nail to protect Native Americans? Who legally worked with them and had our government step in, and long story short, legally worked to ensure Native Americans were legally given their land by the United States, and that way they would not be able to be forced off of it and run off of it. We had a president who fought tooth and nail for the rights and the protection of Native Americans. Anybody remember who that was? If not, I'll love you forever for guessing. I can't love you forever if you don't guess. Throw out a president before Andrew Jackson. Who can name a president before Andrew Jackson? Really? Oh my god, okay. How about what his first name was? James. Guys, you're killing me.
Alright, Madison.
Thank you! Holy smoke, that was like pulling teeth. And you're actually right, it was James Madison.
What other one question before we go. What other James are there besides Lamoureux?
There's not.
There's not?
That means there was 2 options.
Great.
Well, I take that back. There is James Buchanan, but he's way after this time period. He's after Andrew Jackson, for sure. Before Andrew Jackson, there's James Madison, James Monroe. James Madison. So, and we saw the first time this becomes an issue under Andrew Jackson. Because there were some Indians living in Georgia, right? Hopefully this sounds familiar, 13 owners. Indians living in Georgia. Something was found on their land, and even though they legally owned the land, and yes, considered the mineral rights too, that was not split in that day and age. They owned the land, it was theirs. When something was found on Indian land, the treaty got thrown out the window, people moved into their homes, they tried to fight to protect their homes. Long story short, it ended up in the Trail of Tears. Hopefully this sounds familiar. What was found on Indian land that's kicked off the whole Andrew Jackson issue in the first place?
Was it anything gold or something?
Thank you. It was gold, right? The Cherokee in Georgia tried to do things the right way because they were trying so hard to play their part, become as American as possible, tried to use, have our judicial system protect them, and went all the way to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Cherokee. Andrew Jackson didn't give a damn, ended up with the Trail of Tears. Overview. Very, very quick overview. Guess what? There are 7 tribes. They're out starting in Colorado and all up through the Rocky Mountain region of this country who had legally been given their land during the days of James Madison. Well, you will never guess. Come I almost said 1881. Don't ask me where that was coming from. 1851. Again, it was revamped. It was re-signed. Redeclaring this land. It was called the Treaty of Fort Laramie. Again, signed once again by the United States government and the Indians, enforcing this is their land. It will be their land forever. No one can take it from them. Well, guess what? Just a year or 2 later, what could be discovered in this region? What was discovered in Georgia? Gold. There we go. You're killing me today. Gold. Gold will be discovered in the Rocky Mountain region, just like with the Cherokee in the days of Andrew Jackson. As soon as gold is discovered, Americans see dollar signs in front of their eyes. The treaty is put in the paper shredder or lost in translation, right? People are moving into the Rocky Mountain region, trying to run their needs off, taking their land, trying to take this gold as their own, right? Well, when this happened to the Cherokee, not technically long before, just a few decades before, and the Cherokee tried to do things the right way. They tried to go to the United States judicial system. They tried to ask for help the way an American would. They tried to do everything right. Nothing worked, right? I mean, the Supreme Court ruled in their favor, and they still got obliterated. So after what happened with the Cherokee just a few decades before, do you think these tribes are going to try the same thing? Hell no. They say, you want it? Come and get it, right? And it sparks the years and years of these Indian wars as these tribes are trying to hold on to what is legally theirs. And originally, our government tries, and I put that in huge quotes, tries to work with them somewhat, because they say, look, we completely understand why you're upset, we completely understand your fight, we completely understand why you're mad. Look, we're willing to work with you, let's compromise, right? We're going to let you keep your home. We're not going to strip you off of it. We'll let you keep a portion, but we're expecting all of you to shrink down to an area 1/13 the size of your original home. Go, that would be like, let's just say, perfect world, we all have money. Wouldn't that be nice? We all own our own land, and in this day and age, meaning we also own the mineral rights to it, and go with me. It's a fantasy, go with me. We all own our own land. We have our own ranches, our own land. Well, suddenly, shockingly, it is discovered that there is oil abundantly right under the surface of the oil out here in Granbury. Millions and millions of dollars of oil, including oil, we find out, on our own land. It's our land. We own the mineral rights. It's legally ours. That is our oil, right? That is our millions of dollars in oil. We looked up, hot dog. Next thing you know, though, here come government. Here come the government officials. And they tell us we're going to take, there's so much money here that it's more beneficial for the country to have it than you. We're going to take your home from you. But don't worry. Look, so we're going to technically take most of your home, but we're going to let all of you who live here in Granbury stay in Granbury. We're just going to shrink you down to 1/13 the size of the city, and all of you will just live on 1/13 of Granbury, and y'all are going to be okay with that, right? You think that would go over well here? Hell no. You think it's going over well here? So these silly little pathetic memes of keeping the peace the government tries to enforce don't work. So the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, some of the Sioux, they're going to fight for what is theirs, and they're not giving up. And this goes all throughout the Civil War. On and on and on. Do I want to hit this